Dick Armey, and I am the current chairman of FreedomWorks. I'm a free market economist, and of course, in terms of real living economists during the time that I made the transition, Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell were probably the two most important people that I work with. But historically, I follow the Austrian school, and that would be von Mises and Hayek. Clearly, I've studied all the economists in the history of economic thought, and I consider the Austrians to be the best. Also, I was largely influenced by a unique American contribution called public choice theory that was pioneered by Dr. James Buchanan in the state of Virginia. So I would say that my intellectual gantry is substantively the Austrian school of economics, and methodologically, as I apply it to public policy, the public choice theorists. Fairly good grounding in preparation for a career in politics or in office. When we saw the magnitude of the financial catastrophe, it was really quite alarming to me. I just couldn't imagine how could it get so big. So I went back and I reviewed the history of economic analysis, and I kind of hit on, I thought, an important question. When was the last time I did something foolish with money? Because basically what you had is a lot of people making foolish, irresponsible decisions with money. And the last time I did something foolish with money was the last time I had easy money, which stands to reason. Well, so I take a look at the last 2 or maybe 3 decades of too much, too easy money, plus a government that kept prodding bankers in particular in the home building industry into bad decisions. And so basically I was drawn to even a firmer understanding that the Austrian school, with essentially their understanding of prices and then in particular the price interest rate as an allocative function. What happened is we had kept interest rates too low for too long, and it had allocated capital into what was essentially a consumer good use rather than the capital goods use. Compare that, for example, with the extremely important boom period we had in the 80s when capital was allocated into the new electronic sector of the economy, and the enormous growth in industry and jobs that was pursuant to that. What we basically created was this massive big housing bubble, and it was funded by banks that were irresponsible because of too big to fail. They thought the government would bail them out. The government eventually did. Fannie and Freddie Mac, who were government-sponsored enterprises that were just sort of running amok, and with the belief the government would bail them out. Eventually the government did. And then I think the innovation was the mortgage-backed bonds, which enjoyed for a while the benefit of lax bond rating agencies that really didn't understand what was inside the bond and gave them too high a ratings and a false sense of security. So there was a lot of irresponsibility to go around, essentially from the public sector, prompting it in the private sector. Armey's axiom is, in the private sector, all bad habits are habits learned from the public sector. What happened was with President Bush, particularly his big bailout, and the Republicans with their free spending, buy myself a victory in the Kentucky race with the appropriations process, they became the party of big government. And in fact, we even started hearing the concept big government conservatism, which was for many of us quite a baffling notion. Then, of course, they lost, and the Democrats, the real professionals at big government, got elected, and now they're winning. And so you see now the emergence of a reawakening of small government conservatism, not within the halls of Congress or legislative bodies, but within the streets of America. And this is this enormous uprising you see from all over this country with this idea we've got to try to reform one of the two parties, most likely the Republican Party, into being once again the party of small government conservatism. The biggest factor, the Republican Party lost because first it vacated any commitment to small government conservatism in budget issues, you know, holding the line on spending and so forth. And then they elevated an aggressive assault on the social issues. And they got on the wrong side of these issues most often. If in fact you take the social conservative and the economic conservative and you combine them, as Reagan did, as we did with the contract, in resistance to the power of the state, you've got a happy coalition of people that can be successful and attractive to the voters. But if in fact you go as they did under the failing final years of the Republican majority, we're going to expand the power of the state in order to impose our social values on the community, then of course they even lose the evangelicals. They get confused by it. So wait a minute, I didn't think that we were about making the government bigger and stronger and more dictatorial in our lives. We thought we were about our freedom and our liberties and so forth. So they basically, what should I say, got too aggressive on social policy and too complacent on economic policy, and they were basically losing both of the two major components of their prior big tent that they had with Reagan, that they had with the contract. People got disinterested in them, disappointed in them, and of course that set the stage for the Democrats to come rushing in with their big victory, mostly born out of disappointment in the Republicans. Well, obviously, the first one was this heartbreaking issue called Terri Schiavo down in Florida. Here you had a lady on a life support system, contesting between her husband and her parents on whether or not that should continue. And you had all of a sudden a resolution passed through the House, through the Senate, signed by the president, that says the federal government will dictate to the courts in Florida what should be their judgment. So what they did with this, first of all, they got involved in a family's private business. What is the federal government doing in that? Secondly, they vacated their historic notion of resistance to judicial activism, and they vacated the historic commitment to federalism, let the states run the states' business to keep the federal government out of it. They were historically opposed to mandates by the feds to the states, and so they said, well, if a federal legislative body, an executive branch, dictates to a state court what their judgment must be, then all of these things are fine. Well, this was way, way heavy-handed and expanding the power of the state into the family's business, into the state's business at the federal level. So the other one that was frankly very difficult intellectually for a lot of these folks to grasp was the whole issue of homosexual marriages. In 96, because of an aggressive thrust by a governor in Massachusetts and a mayor in San Francisco trying to use the power of the state to impose homosexual marriage on the community, the Republicans who resisted that prospered electorally. They came back 2 years later and they said, you know, that was a good issue for us, let's start a new fight. So they jumped from the defensive side of the ball to the offensive side of the ball and said, we will expand the power of the state in order to give definition to marriage. Well, all of a sudden, they think their issue is the homosexual marriage issue, but their issue is really, in this case, are we resisting expansion in the power of the state for social policy purposes, or are we trying to advance the power of the state for those same purposes and different outcomes? And of course they lost again. So this was just simply, again, not understanding the core value that binds conservatives together: resistance to growth in the power of the state and defense of individual liberty. They can. President Bill Clinton in 93 and 94 became a very big and scary disappointment. He built a stage. We got entrepreneurial and we jumped up on that stage with a creative vision for America and a public policy for America. If the Republicans can recognize that this administration is building faster and even bigger stage of discontent and worry, and get up on that with new ideas, new commitments to big notions of freedom, liberty, and small government restraint, responsibility, respect, they can do that. And the Democrats know that. Right now, the Democrats see the power of small government conservatism as a big movement in America more clearly than the Republicans do. Republicans right now are still, like I say, wallowing around, entertaining themselves with their little itty-bitty big tent theory that requires very little more commitment than just candidate recruitment. Let's go find ourselves a liberal, run them as a Republican, and we're sure to win. That's a sure way to lose. The fact of the matter is you're not going to be attractive to the voters you need, the swing voters. By the way, let me just point out that in New Jersey, just across the river from New York, the small government conservative movements, when they saw a Republican that could win and beat the very liberal Democrat, they abandoned their party, their candidate, and went there. So they can be very practical in how they cast their votes if they see the chance for a victory. No. First of all, the center of politics in America today is small government conservatism, fiscal conservatism. That's the center stake in the big tent. Love of individual liberty. Well, the Democrats are scared and say they're going to take our freedom away to control our own health care. So what the Republicans need to do is understand the center. Basically, what they want to do is they want to have a right wing of the Republican Party and a left wing of the Republican Party. They don't want the center body, which is where all the voters are standing on the middle ground. So the center of political values in America, policy positions in America, is small government conservatism. And what the Republicans need to do is say, and I'll give you an example. Mike Castle in Delaware is a good fiscal conservative. Now the evangelicals are never going to love him on the social issues, but he will be elected the next senator because he stands on that center ground of fiscal conservatism. And so, again, if he stands there and says, I'm going to defend against irresponsible spending, I'm going to try to fight against the unreasonable and unnecessary growth of power of government and defend individual liberties, he stands on safe ground. He's hardly a right-wing conservative, for example, in the mold of Dick Armey, but he can stand comfortably on that ground, and that ground is the center ground. You really need to get these social issues to the back burner. And I happen to be an evangelical, and I'm very serious in my appreciation for the Lord Jesus going to the cross for me personally. And I'm very committed to the life of the unborn. But when I ran in 1984, I met with the head of the Texas Right to Life, and he said, what's your position on right to life? I stated my position. He says, that's great. We love you for it. Now keep your mouth shut about it. You don't need to talk about these issues. Don't get them out there in front. Talk about the economic issues. And what you need to do, certainly I wouldn't suggest to anybody that they should not have a clear resolve on this. But what you have right now is two competing theories of big tent. And it's kind of interesting to watch this. There is right now what I call the itty-bitty theory of big tent, which is we need Republican candidates. The whole tent should be defined by the behavior of our candidates. And we need to have some candidates that act like Ronald Reagan, and some candidates make it clear they're willing to acquiesce to the liberals' agenda. So this is what I would call the little schizophrenic tent, and it's just going to confuse the voters. It's not going to inspire them, and they're just going to go away. Or you can take the massive big tent notion, which is we are a party that's committed to policy principles, the wonder of the Constitution, the magic of individual liberty, the restraint of big government, and these principles will govern our behavior. And there's room in this tent for everybody, irrespective of party labels or things of this nature. Nothing superficial about us. This is a very substantively defined big tent. That is the tent that the Republicans have always won in the past and can win in the future. They will not win in the itty-bitty little tent. There are a great many opportunities for that leader to emerge. And by the way, when this Republican Party has itself embraced this concept, it has prospered with the voting electorate. Well, I think right now, for example, Sarah Palin is a possibility, although you have to understand in politics, which is about at least 50% personality contest or beauty contest or talent contest. Uh, People of deep substance can be at a disadvantage, but Sarah Palin's out there. Certainly, I think Governor Palin is a very attractive option out there. Governor Romney is with Governor Haley Barbour from Mississippi. There are a great many people that can possibly emerge as leader, but they cannot win the embrace of these folks unless they show a deep-seated commitment to the conservative small government principles. I'll give you an example. George Herbert Walker Bush, before you were born, won the presidency, which was in effect Ronald Reagan winning a third term. He quickly became a bitter disappointment to this same block of voters when he raised taxes in 1990 in violation of his tax pledge of 1988. That read my lips, no new taxes. He lost his presidency, his chance for a second term, when he raised those taxes in the fall of 90. That created this large group of disappointed voters who what? They went to Ross Perot. And everybody say, well, Ross Perot came in as a spoiler and took George Bush's winning chance away from him. That's not true at all. Those voters were made available to Ross Perot by George Bush in 1990. So bang, they let one in. Then there was the confusion. You had Clinton. All of a sudden, these same voters are reawakened by the contract, and they come back to the Republican Party in support of the contract. Now what you see is those same voters got disillusioned with everybody and stayed home. Barack Obama wins the election, and in the next election, what you're going to see is a reawakening in esteemed voters on behalf of the Republican Party, if the Republican Party can once again comprehend it and come home to these voters. They can win a lot of elections with these folks. First of all, I feel bad for Sarah Palin. First thing you got to understand about Sarah Palin is she is her own person, and she made her position in life on her own terms. She wasn't somebody's wife. She wasn't somebody's daughter. She got out and she won the governorship of Alaska, no small task, all on her own, with nothing paving the way for her. So in some respects, she's everything that Hillary Clinton pretends to be, an independent woman making her own way on her own terms. Now, her problem was she became a vice presidential candidate. This is a fatal place to be. Now, what happens? We saw the same thing years ago with Dan Quayle. As soon as you become the vice presidential candidate, a new attractive face on the block, and you have a great success like her first acceptance speech at the convention, the presidential candidate's staff begins to sabotage you. Because the last thing they want is the new vice presidential candidate to outshine their guy. And so she was subjected to all of the difficulties that naturally befall in politics, which is a curious form of juvenile delinquency, the vice presidential. So she got battered pretty badly. She has to kind of come back from that and make her own way again on her own terms, and not be. And I don't know whether it'll be possible for her to do so. She is so demonized by so many different forces, it's very hard to come back from that. Right now, the fashionable thing is to be intellectually and morally superior than those Palin supporters, and fashionableness has a lot of influence over people's behavior politically. So Governor Palin, for example, has a chance to make a whole fresh new start without that difficulty that she had to experience. I think the new fresh face, this is another thing. Nobody can look at Palin and say, well, you were part of that gang that broke our heart just a few years ago. So he got a great opportunity to make a good start here. I don't know what happens with Mitt Romney. One of the problems in politics is they're so shallow and short-sighted. If you didn't win 4 years ago, it is presumed that you can't possibly be the guy that can win now. I guess they forget Ronald Reagan losing in '76 and coming back and winning in '80. So there are a lot of people, but they're going to have to make a new and hard revival of their standing with people, and they can do that within this context of the new energy in the politics in America. The dominant energy in politics in America is a small government conservative movement. And I argued with President Bush going into Iraq. I saw no need to go in there. Small government conservative basically says this: in order for the government to take a course of action, there must be two conditions that must be met. First, it must be the right thing to do, and secondly, it must be the necessary thing to do. And it is possible that the Iraq War might have been the right thing to do. I don't think so, but it's possible because it violated a fundamental tenet of American history. We don't make attacks on nations that haven't first provoked us by attacking us. And then secondly, it wasn't necessary. So George and I talked to the president. I said, Mr. President, if you get involved in this war, it's going to define your whole president. It's going to consume all your time and resources. You'll never be able to get back to your domestic policy agenda, and you're going to end up being a big, bitter disappointment to even your own supporters. I think that's exactly how it turned out. The Democrats always had the argument that we shouldn't have been in Iraq, but we should have cleaned out al-Qaeda out of Afghanistan. They got out of Iraq. Now they're moving into Afghanistan. They're finding their own difficulties there. The problem is we must defend ourselves against international aggression and terrorism, but we need to do that in a manner that is smart. We're talking about one of what's got to be the most precious thing in the world we have to spend: the lives and limbs of our children. The most precious people in the whole world to us are our children. We don't put them on a field of battle without first making definitive ownership of that field with our resources. We should never deploy one single young American person onto any field of battle unless our presence is first definitive. None of this moving, insufficient troops around the board and so forth. So right now, what I believe to be the fatal and devastating history of the Bush adventure into Iraq is now history, and now the nation is coping with, all right, now how do we deal with another rather bumbling, stumbling president in a new adventure in Afghanistan? And I think President Barack Obama is becoming equally frightening and disappointing to the American people in Afghanistan as Bush had been in Iraq. Well, insofar as you're saying, all right, we're going to defend America from international terrorism by cleaning out al-Qaeda. We think al-Qaeda, let's say we think al-Qaeda, the place to clean them out is Afghanistan. We're going to go in there. Our presence is going to be definitive. We're going to go in, we're going to get the job done, and we're going to get out of there. And we're going to do this. We're going to have an implementation of deployment that is so overwhelming that our people are at minimal risk for the loss of their life and limb. You have to keep your troops safe. Our superiority is our technology. We must have the full deployment of our technology in order to let our troops on the ground be mission effective and as safe as they can possibly be. Right now, we've got our folks wandering around in the desert over there in the worst kind of danger without the proper backup, without the proper equipment. We're losing lives every day with very, very little mission accomplishment that attaches to the terrible, heartbreaking cost of that loss of life. And it needs to be a much more expansive effort, or get out. Either get in and get the job done, or get out of there and fight them on another field. The first thing I would do is let them know that we will broke no nonsense from these folks. We're going to find out the truth of the matter with respect to this. You understand, Israel is not going to sit around and wait till the Iranians have all these weapons and all this capacity to attack them. and understand that Israel can have a definitive impact here, and let them know that we're not going to be fooling around with you about this. We don't trust you. We want definitive proof of good intentions and disarmament, or we will, in fact, in alliance with Israel or whomever, take definitive action. The fact of the matter is, Iran has always hoodwinked our State Department in our efforts in the past. We should let them know, no nonsense now. We don't like you, we don't trust you, and we don't ever expect you to ever be reasonable people in the world scene. But we do believe that we have the capacity to control your behavior and to disarm you from the most insidious forces of mass destruction, and we're prepared to do that if you don't come to terms. No, not at all. I think a lot of people don't understand this at all. First of all, understand that in the state of New York, there has been a very active conservative party for decades. Elected Senator Buckley in the 70s. And if you look at the history of congressional races in New York, and probably a lot of other races, I've seen it through congressional races, the Conservative Party oftentimes nominates a person. Historically, they've been the good sports that have been willing to step back and throw their support to the Republicans in the interest of stopping a more liberal Democrat from getting in office. Now, what happened in New York 23rd was a handful of people got into a back room and nominated a Democrat. And the first thing we heard, for example, in my shop at FreedomWorks was from our grassroots activists in the North Country in New York. They said, the Republicans have just lost this race. This woman can't possibly win this race. She would not have won a Republican primary. She was too liberal. There's no way she would have won a Republican primary. So what happened was the Conservative Party said, oh my gosh, the Republicans are about to lose this race, and they fielded their candidate. So what happened was there were three candidates from three different parties in the race. Two liberals in the Republican and Democrat nominees, and one conservative. The conservative candidate, although he was a first-time candidate, quite naive and innocent in the ways of politics, he grew so fast in his standing with the electorate that she got knocked out of the race. When she got knocked out of the race, what did she do? She made a deal with the White House and Chuck Schumer and endorsed the Democrat. So what did I say? The first validation I see in this, our grassroots activists called that correctly, didn't they? They did, in fact, nominate a Democrat. And the Conservative Party failed to win that election. Now, this is a short-term victory for the Republicans. They can celebrate it all they want, because a year from now, the Democrats will lose that seat because the Republicans will have an open primary. They'll nominate a conservative Republican, or at least a middle-of-the-road Republican, and that person will win the race back from the Democrat. So that Democrat will only sit in that office for about a year. And when that happens, the Conservative Party will once again play their role of being in support of their principles and working the Republican nominee a little bit more to their perspective on public policy, and then helping him beat the Democrat. Social issues were so I was up there. I mean, socialists were just simply not part of the debate in that race. The Democrat candidate, when it was just the two of them in the race, the Democrat was running against her as a big spender. And so her first transgression was she was for big budgets, she was for cap and trade, she was for card check, the mandatory union plan that denied workers a secret ballot. So she took on economic issues, irrespective, and I saw no discussion of social issues in that race. On economic issues, she was so liberal that even the Democrat was running against her for being too liberal. At some point, everybody who's seeking office or wanting to hold office, at some point they have to respond to the voting constituency whose votes they want. And right now the Republicans are in office are kind of confused about that. This Tea Party movement, which is what you see right now as most visible in grassroots conservatism, is 1,000 points of entrepreneurial light in advocating small government conservatism. It's popped up all over the country, and it is the most genuine, largest grassroots movement I've ever seen on particularly the economic issues. The office holders are starting, oh, I get it. If I want to be reelected, I better be responsive to what these guys are telling me. That's where all the energy. There's no greater source of energy in public policy discourse and politics today than the small government conservatives. The orthodox Republican Party is dispirited and confused and going through a massive identity crisis where they're trying to basically ask the questions, who are we and what are we doing here? The Democrats are inflicted with probably the most severe case of buyer's remorse they ever had, even worse than with the Clintons in '93 and '94, and they have no energy to bring to the field. So the field is right now dominated by the extremely big tent of small government conservatism, which has Democrats, Republicans, independents, libertarians, evangelicals, people of all stripes and color, and religious orientation. And they're all happily joined in resistance to a growth in the power of the state that they find frightening for their personal liberties. First of all, younger voters are ideological. They're idealists. They want you to stand for something. They don't understand pork. They don't need pork. So to them, it's not about, all right, what's in it for me? It's, what do you stand for? When the Republican Party stands for a vision of freedom and independence from the intrusions of big government, individuals' opportunity to be creative and entrepreneurial. Look at how many college dropouts created a new and wonderful product in the 80s because they had a world where you could get the money for your investment and your work would be honored. And that was a big draw to the Hispanics. Are the same thing. They're an entrepreneurial group of people, and they could and should be quite available to the Republicans if the Republicans hadn't once again taken an overly aggressive big government approach to immigration. If they remember that Ronald Reagan stood there and said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, instead of going to San Diego and saying, I tell you what, let's build the wall, they offended the Hispanic voter. Bless their heart, I love the Hispanic people. They've got such a great entrepreneurial energy. But you know, Armey's axiom is you can't call her ugly all year and expect her to go to the prom with you. So a lot of natural Republican constituent votes in the Hispanic community were lost simply because people said, I'm not going to vote for them, they don't like me. Because again, they had a short-sighted, politically defined view of immigration that had a mean spirit to it. And the Hispanics, I think they took exactly the correct approach to the Republican. Why should I vote for these guys with their attitude towards me? Get expansive about things that are bigger than ourselves. This is a great free land built by immigrants who had entrepreneurial opportunities and used them to make their families better off. And let's have these doors open, and then let's civilize the government, make the INS an agency that isn't mean, cruel, and indifferent. Make it one that's a service in the lives of real people wanting to be free, as it should be. But again, so the Republican has had a failed political vision, and the government fails in its duty to a very large and exciting, energetic immigration population for this country. I think they could, yes. This is a very interesting thing. We've got to remember the Republican Party was born with the Emancipation Proclamation. It's very difficult to reach out to African voters, but it starts with just the beginning of making the effort. In the end, we're all the same. We have the same dream for our children. We all love freedom. We all love independence. The biggest problem that Republicans have in reaching African voters is gerrymandering. The Democrats have by and large sequestered the African American voter into areas where Republicans just simply don't hold office because they've gerrymandered the vote. And it's a tough issue for them. It's again, Hispanics are the easy opportunity for Republicans to get back on the ground they ought to stand on with the Hispanic community. African American communities are much harder, but it's certainly not a community that isn't available to our values if we speak about values, things that are great and sacred and important to Americans.